are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
Sometimes we need to go, you know what? That was a great season.
Yes.
And move on to the next season. Sometimes the new season is doing a similar thing, or sometimes, I've discovered that the heart is right, the passion is right, the gifting is not optimal for what they were trying to do.
Yep.
And that's what I love about the church these days, is that there's just room for a lot of different kind of gifts.
That's right.
And that's how you build a strong church, is you look around and you go, who has God given us here?
That's right.
What are they really gifted at?
Yes.
One of my favorite scriptures is the idea that there's a wisdom in a multitude of counselors. And that's true about counseling, but it's also true about building a church or anything else. I don't have to know everything.
Yeah.
I just have to know people that know something about things. And if I don't have to do it,
right.
If I don't have to micromanage it,
right.
I can release it and it can grow.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host Jay Pathak talks with Greg Surratt. Greg is the founding pastor of Seacoast Church in Charleston, as well as the president and co-founder of the Association of Related Churches, known as ARC. ARC is a global church planting initiative that has established over 800 churches worldwide since its founding in 2000. Let's listen in.
Greg, thanks for joining me on our podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And are you right now in Charleston?
I am in sunny, hot Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah, million degrees. But one of the coolest cities I've ever visited, by the way. I love your city. I would go there. We'd go there on the way to Hilton Head, all grown up for me as a kid.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so
it's a great place. It really is.
It is. Love it. Well, and it's as I recall, maybe it's changed. It was continually rated one of the friendliest cities in America.
Yes, it is. It's a polite city. They won't tell you what they really think. They just say, "Bless your heart."
Bless your heart. Exactly. Yeah, but I don't know. That's pretty cool. And
it's a beautiful city. Yeah.
It really is. I mean, yeah, I really like it. And I just love to hear a bit of your story. And then, of course, we're doing things to partner with ARC, and the Vineyard has been for a while. And so I want to make sure we get to that. But I'd love to hear, stories where stories always should start, which is where you were born and where you grew up. Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, I was born in Oklahoma, but I never lived there. My dad was... I think there's a song about that.
Maybe I was going to say there's
something. Yeah, but my dad was a traveling evangelist when I was born, and so he dropped my mom off in her hometown. I was born, and then we hit the road a couple of days later. So that's all I know about being born in Oklahoma. Grew up in Denver, Colorado.
Yeah,
and my dad pastored there for 14 years. So I went to high school there, married my sweetheart there.
Where'd you go to high school in Denver?
Bear Creek High School.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah,
and what church did he pastor?
It was called First Assembly of God Lakewood back then.
Really?
I'm not sure it even exists. Yeah.
Wait a minute. I might know some folks that are around that, because we have one of our churches is in Lakewood.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. Because I know your brother. We've met a number of times here in Denver and done some things at church planting, but I did not know that detail.
We lived on Green Mountain, not very far from Red Rocks up there.
Yeah,
so
I know exactly.
That's where I grew up. That's my old stomping grounds.
Wow, so that was all the way up to the beginning of high school, or all through high school?
I went all through high school. I graduated from there, lived in Arvada at first. That's where Dad first lived.
That's where I live right now. That's where I'm talking to you from.
Is that right?
This exact second.
Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. Old school here. We lived out by Arvada West High School.
Oh, yeah. And, sure.
That's where I went to elementary school, moved then to Green Mountain, unincorporated Lakewood at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
And, grew up there, met my wife. My wife went to Aurora Central High School.
Okay.
And, so, yeah, that's my home.
But you grew up following Jesus, like the church is in the center of your life. I mean, obviously your dad's a pastor. I mean, was that like that's like life?
It definitely was life. And it was good. I mean, in small churches, that's all I ever knew was small churches, and love small churches, love small church pastors. But yeah, I mean, I grew up in it. And as any teenager, I did my own thing. It was the 70s. And so it was a crazy time. And I had a band during that time.
Really?
Yeah. I just recently watched the Jesus Revolution.
Oh, yeah.
And that whole thing really impacted me. In fact, we started playing music. We played both secular and Christian music, but we weren't able to get into a lot of churches in that time because that wasn't a thing. But somewhere in that time, post high school, I really made a strong commitment of my life to Christ, but always was kind of in the church.
And did you, as a kid, have a sense, man, I think I might be called to ministry, or what were you thinking you were going to do for a career?
I didn't want to do that. No, yes. I wanted to be a rock star.
Oh, a rock star, of course.
Yeah,
okay.
There you go.
Okay.
But that didn't work out for me, so I went into ministry.
Now, you do have a song. You have a song somewhere in here. Yeah, born in Oklahoma, and never lived there. I wanted to be a rock star, but now I'm a pastor. Yeah. There's a lot.
We had one of the guys in our band, and we were just all guys in our little church there.
Yeah.
And it was a Pentecostal church, so it invited participation. And so we would play our instruments, on a Sunday night service and all that. And we got together and started playing. And one of our friends who was in our band went on to really be, he was the most recorded guitar player in Nashville history.
Wow.
Session player, played on all the country music in the 90s and early 2000s, and came to my church once. Still loves Jesus, follows Jesus. And so we sat down, and the people in our church had no idea that I played a little bit.
Right.
And so we sat up front and played. And I asked him, I said, Brent, back in the day, how good was I? People want to know, how good was I? He said, in Nashville, he said, you've got two kinds of musicians. You've got those with talent, and you've got those with instruments. And he said, you had instruments. That's brutal. That's the long and short of that whole deal. Yeah.
Brutal. Well, and so it'd be interesting. I mean, probably some other time, but in that same little window, of course, Calvary Chapel comes into being, the Vineyard comes, so.
Yep.
And because I'm in Denver right now, a lot of those things were burgeoning like you're describing in that time. And then there's this powerful move of God. I mean, the Jesus Revolution stuff in Southern California, which washed pretty quickly into Denver.
It did. My grandfather pastored a church in West Los Angeles. We lived in Santa Monica. I lived with him. And so I would go down to the tent at Calvary Chapel to the concerts.
Wow.
Then when my parents moved away from Denver, when I would come back to Denver, I'd go to Tom Stipe's church.
There you go. Yeah.
At Calvary Chapel in Vineyard, then back to Calvary Chapel.
Yeah, exactly.
There. In fact, I was at the first service, I believe, where Richie Furay led worship and Tom started the church. And so, that was all a part of,
wow.
That's all a part of growing up in Denver at the time.
Well, and I have all the legends of that, and our church is one exit east of where Tom's church was on Kipling. So we're right on Wadsworth and I-70. So
oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's where we planted our church. And so when I moved here, there's all the things happening, in Arvada is where we started. So, okay. So you leave high school, you realize you're not going to be a rock star. And then you're like, okay, I gotta have a real life somehow. But you moved to California. Is that the first place you go, or how did you actually start thinking about ministry?
I went to college and went to a Bible college.
Okay,
didn't have any intention of going because again I was going to play music, and my parents moved from Denver. I graduated from high school. Next day, went to Chicago. We played 4 nights a week in Chicago for 6 weeks.
Wow. And
during that time, my parents moved away from Denver, and that's all I knew. So they moved to Missouri. I was kind of lost. And my girlfriend decided to go to Bible school in Texas And I kind of knew I wasn't ready to get married, but I wasn't ready to lose her either. I didn't have anything else to do. So I showed up, with long hair and all that kind of thing. They made me get haircuts, and it was just crazy, crazy time. I was there for all the wrong reasons. So I got kicked out of Bible college.
Wow.
And,
that's a fun story, I bet.
Oh, it is, but it was the 70s. But anyway, went to a couple of Bible colleges and same results, and kind of bounced around, lived with my grandpa for a little while out in L.A., then came back to Denver and got a job with Hewlett Packard, actually, in Loveland, Colorado.
Yeah.
And so I was putting together making computer chips, got married, lived for a little while in Arvada. This is inside talk. Wadsworth and about 80th is about where we were.
Listen to me. I'm right next to Pomona High School.
Are you really? Well, then we moved to Loveland. I worked for Hewlett Packard, and while we were there, we started going to a little Assembly of God church. So they asked us to work, do a class with the students, and so we did. I was one of the students. I was like, I don't know, 19, 20, 21 years old, something like that. And Hewlett Packard opened the new plant in Corvallis, Oregon, and offered us just a lot of money to go there. It was just an amazing, amazing thing. And at the same time, the pastor of the little church in Fort Collins took me to breakfast. He didn't know that I had this offer from Hewlett Packard, and he made me an offer to come be the full-time youth pastor at that church for $6,500 a year. I remember it to this day. And my wife had to quit her job because they wanted both of us,
Right.
And we were living large at the time. We had a couple of sports cars and lived in the nicest, apartments you can live in. And I just knew it was God. It was crazy. I didn't even, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really like the church.
Right.
It just didn't fit with kind of, I don't know where I was, but what I thought I was. But I knew it was God. And so we sold the cars, got an old beater, moved into government housing, and became a youth pastor there for a year until I got fired again there.
This is a story of uninterrupted success. Yeah.
It is. It's total. It's like my first 3 jobs as youth pastors, I didn't do well. And my wife bought me a book while we were in Denver. Actually, we were in Fort Collins. There used to be an old Christian bookstore in Denver, and they had a bargain barrel. And there was a book for 25 cents that said, "All originality makes a dull church." And the idea was you didn't have to reinvent the wheel. God was doing some things, in various places around the United States, just the United States in that particular book. I had no idea. I'd never been outside of the denomination, the small churches I was a part of. And again, I thank God for those churches.
Yeah.
But I began to read this book, and it was a story of Robert Schuller and Crystal Cathedral and Chuck Smith and Calvary Chapel and several, Gene Getz Bible Church. There were just several of them in there. And I was fascinated. I was drawn. I was fascinated. And I said, I want to do that. And I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
I just wanted to be a part of a different kind of church that maybe reached my generation, because I had a lot of friends that quit going to church. And so getting fired, getting the book, we left Colorado, moved to Missouri, lived in my parents' basement.
So wait, how old are you at this point? You're like
23, and ultimately ended up. My uncle was somehow in the executive realm of district of AG in Illinois, and I told him I would like to pastor a church, I think. And I had great credentials for that. This is my background, but I got this book and I think I want to do something. And so
I love it.
He got me a chance to try out for it. That's what you did in the AG.
Right.
Try out for this little church in Pana, Illinois. And they had 9 members and a little building, actually. They had a building and 9 members. And so my wife and I came and we spoke, and I taught Sunday school, led worship, preached, and they were going to vote. And they voted and said, no, thank you. so it was unanimous. So my uncle said, hey, next week, there's quite a bit bigger church. They have 13 members. And it's up in a cornfield in northwest Illinois. And so we went out, preached, and they took us, and we started. And so that's how I got started in ministry.
Yeah, so like, when you think back on that, at least in the way you're telling the story, there's no like super clear like, and I just knew that the Lord called me. It's more like a hunch. Like, I don't know, I'm doing this thing. I read this book that really intrigues me. I mean, how do you, when you think back on that?
There was one more piece of it.
Yeah,
there was one more piece of it. When the band was in Illinois, after I graduated, they had us do a big youth rally. It was a church-sponsored deal, and so we did. And the guys all said, hey, normally what we do is we play, put our guitars down, walk off the stage, hope they clap loud enough that we come back on, And they said, at this thing, we need somebody to say something at the end. So, okay, who should do that? And they said, well, you should. Your dad's a preacher. It's that qualified me.
That was the qualification, yeah.
And I was following Jesus, but it was from a distance. You know what I mean? I'd always been in church, but not real solid. But anyway, so that night we played, and I spoke, and it was almost like an out-of-body experience. It was like I had something to say, and the kids listened. There were a few hundred kids there, and they listened. And so after that was all over, and I just kind of gave an invitation. And after that was all over, I called my girlfriend, who became my wife, the one I chased down to school in Texas. And I said, I don't know if this music thing is going to work out. I don't know. But something happened tonight, and I just don't know what that was about. So I did have one of those kind of experiences where I experienced God in front of a crowd, which was amazing. And then it was just kind of a hunch and journey from there. Wow,
that's cool. Okay, so now you're in Northwest Illinois, church membership, 13 people. You're the ripe old age of what, like
23.
Late 20, 23. So 23.
23.
Because that's what we all want. We want a 23-year-old lead pastor.
That's who you need to listen to. Yeah. That was so funny. People would come to me for counseling, counseling. And I mean, they would ask me about stuff. I had no clue people even did those things. So I would say something like this. I would say, listen, I tell you what I've got to do is I've got to pray about this. And then you come back in. So they would leave, and I would call my uncle, who was a district official. I'd say, Uncle, hey, listen, what do you say about this? That was my wisdom of the time, but we made it through. Yeah.
It's so great. It's so great. Okay. So now you've now been fired from a few things, kicked out of Bible college, accepted at the prestigious position of a Northwest rural church of 13 members. I mean, so how does ministry continue to progress from there? There's a lot of things that happen between where you are now and there. Yeah.
Well, I got depressed to start with. It was 1979. That was the blizzard of 79. You can Wikipedia that one in Illinois, and just a terrible time. I mean, when we went to this little town. We're from Denver, right? Never really been anywhere else except for L.A. and Chicago, traveling around, but now it's gray, cold.
Yeah.
Temperature never got above 32 degrees until March. We got there in like January, and snow piled up. And come to find out, it wasn't as easy as the book that I read. And so it wasn't long until I got depressed. I've never been depressed in my life, and I got it just went into a black hole, the kind of depression you don't want to get out of bed for, and who do you talk to, and all that kind of thing. I thank God for a godly wife and for my dad, who was very, very encouraging. And then I found a book about cognitive therapy, telling yourself the truth, and it's based on biblical principles, and that has stuck with me all these years. But anyway, came through that, and it took about 6 months, 8 months to really come through that. And then we began to love those people and pasture the people and all their cows and pigs, and had more of those in the county than we had people.
That's so perfect.
God was gracious to us.
Yeah.
We began to pastor the church. I exposed myself to different models. In fact, I ran into John Wimber at about that time. And he became, I just listening to his stuff. And then I went over and watched a Wimber event in Michigan at University of Michigan. And really, really opened me up to the possibilities of just the awe, the wonder of God. Just, hey, I wonder what God could do if we just invited him. And the little church began to grow, and probably grew to, I don't know, 200-300 people, maybe 400 sometimes.
Wow.
We were there to about 8.5 years, and really sensed, I don't know what it was, a divine dissatisfaction, maybe, a call to plant a church. I wanted to go to a major city, and went to Denver, and really didn't sense God was there for me, and went into Chicago and was going to plant one. In fact, I worked on it for about 3 or 4 months. Then I thought, I ought to look at the other churches around here. And right across the highway was Willow Creek Church, and Bill Hybels. And they were just reaching unchurched people, which is what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to do it, but what I wanted to do, and reach people like me. And ultimately, I got a call from my cousin in Charleston, South Carolina, which was the farthest from where I'd ever thought about going. They said, why don't you come be on staff with us and help with our young adults? And we have a vision to plant churches. And so I did. And that's how we ended up in Charleston. And a year later, with their blessing and help, we planted Seacoast Church in Mount Pleasant, which is a part of Charleston.
Yeah. And what year would that? So how old are you at that point? You're in your 30s.
1988. I'm 32 years old, probably.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
1988. Yeah.
Wow. And what did it mean to plant then? Did it mean I just go with a few of my friends and we meet in somebody's house, or did it mean we're gonna like put a bunch of money together and try and buy some land? What did that mean then?
There wasn't a lot of like material out on how you do it, man.
Exactly.
I mean, you had examples of Vineyard and Calvary Chapel, but I don't know what it was, but I look back now and I say, okay, we have 4 children. And when you have a baby, and by the way, what I'm going to tell you is just my way. It's not the right way.
Right.
It's just what what I saw. But when you have children, they give them an APGAR test. And I don't even know what APGAR stands for, but it's a test to see how viable they are. Are they in crisis? What's the chance of them, doing well? And early on, and one of the big criteria is the baby's weight. If the baby's weight is strong, then it's better for all things being considered, it's better for survival and viability and all that. So I thought about that with churches, and I got this idea that let's try to launch large rather than in a house or there's nothing wrong with that. I've got friends that have done that, but so I talked to our pastor there, and he gave me the okay and said, you can go here. And people that live there already, that's great. One of the most generous guys I've ever met.
Yeah. And
then I got a hold of a marketing program that was absolutely obnoxious. It was, you take a phone book. Remember when you had phone books?
Oh yeah.
You take a phone book and you cut out the pages of the area you want to go to, and you divide up those names. And I hired some people. We didn't have enough people to do it all. And you call them right at dinner time. And back when phones were connected to the wall,
Yeah, exactly.
And you hated dinner time phone calls. And we do a survey. And I would say, do you go to church? And if they said no, we said, or if they said yes, we said, hey, keep going. Great. End of conversation. If they said no, we said, why do you think people don't go to church? We just kind of did a religious survey. And what was interesting is, if you go back to that point in time, we started in April of 88. And in the fall of 87, a big ministry called Jim Baker, which was down the road in Charlotte, collapsed. Okay. and then while we were making these phone calls, Jimmy Swaggart, which was the biggest ministry around in Louisiana, collapsed also.
Yep.
And so it's an incredible climate for, a survey of why people that don't go to church don't go.
They got things to say. That's right.
They did. And we said, okay, if we address some of the things we're talking about, would you be interested in coming? And, 340 people came the first week in a movie theater, filled it up, surprised us, amazing. And
how many did you have? How many did you have locked? You're like, okay, we kind of know
55.
It's this.
We had 55.
You only had 55 locked because you're like, these are from the church, or we already know them. Wow.
Yeah, we were meeting. Yeah, we had 340 people, and here's the problem. I had no idea that most of those people wouldn't come back. None.
Okay. So they all showed, and then that's it.
Well, they showed, and then I called my buddy in Denver, who I grew up with, who was at our home church, and I said, Terry, you've got to come. Revival's breaking out here, man. This thing's growing. It's liable to be 1,000 in a few months, and so he quit his job.
Oh my God!
Moved to Charleston, and we did have a revival, but it was a Gideon revival. We had less people every week. Actually, and this is true, we had less people every year for 3 years than we had the year before. And
wow.
at some point, he said, "When does this revival thing kick in?" I'm depressed. Don't talk to me about it.
Totally. So wait, you said 300 and how many?
340.
340. So then that goes down,
to about 150 people.
Okay, throughout a year or so, and then 3 years later.
3 years. It went from 180 to 160 down to about 140. And it took 5 years for it to grow back to the original, launch size. So I call Seacoast the slowest growing megachurch in the history of America.
Yeah, I was going to say. And so how do you, so now you're, you move from revivals coming to, oh no, what have we done? How did you stay? Well, first of all, how did you even survive? And then how did you stay motivated? That's not, because there's a lot of humans right now in the exact moment you were in, right? You launch with big dreams, credible hopes. You might even see a few bursts of excitement. Man, this person came to Christ, or we did a baptism and 15 people got baptized. We only had 50 of us. But your story is more common than it's, it's the normal way.
I think it is. And it's harder today than it was then for several reasons. And one of those would be like you just said, we baptized 15 people or 5 people or 3 people, and we're excited. And we didn't have social media back then. We got on social media, and you saw this church baptized for 3 hours, and it was spontaneous and thousands of people, and you feel like, oh my God, who am I? And then when people did leave, they just kind of slipped out. They just kind of slipped out. Today, they kind of post that on Facebook, and they talk about how they're at a new church where they really preach the word. And it's hard. I'm telling you, for church planners today, it's hard.
It is.
Yeah, I offered to resign 3 times to the elders of the planting church, and they wouldn't accept my resignation.
Wow.
I really did feel like, and that's crazy too when you look back at it. You got 150 people that are, that's awesome. That's a lot. That's just amazing. And yet it wasn't my expectation. And now I say, if you're not hitting expectations, lower them. Lower your expectations. Celebrate everything.
Amen.
And really, it's just, and love people. You be the best pastor 50 people have ever had, or 150 people have ever had, or you just love people. And I had to turn it around and really start. There are a lot of reasons. We wanted to reach unchurched people, We had no idea how.
Yeah.
I'm a preacher's kid. We had several preacher's kids that were in our core team. So we were trying to emulate, Willow Creek. Somebody told me one time that there were a lot of Willow Creek clones that were up a creek without a Hybels back in the day. I think we were, and
right. What did that mean? That meant we're gonna do a skit. We're gonna
do a skit. There's nothing worse than preaching after a bad skit. There's nothing worse than that. Dude, and we did them. And then we didn't worship. It was like sing a couple of songs, and worship is a part of who our core is for us, as far as growing up in a Pentecostal church,
right,
and being influenced by Wimber, and some of that in Illinois, and so it just didn't fit. It was like Saul's armor; it just didn't fit. And when we finally kind of went, okay, we're going to be, we never lost our vision for unchurched people. We just said we are going to practice hospitality. And we're going to expect that people will be in our gatherings. We also, we're not going to do everything we know how to do in every gathering. We'll have places we have deliverance ministry, and we have, places for other things. We're not going to do it all at one time.
Yeah.
And when we have guests, we're going to explain what goes on. We're going to, just be hospitable is what we're going to be, but we're going to be us. We're going to be who we are. That's a simple version. We probably learned systems too from Rick Warren, the base path, and still in ARC, we have the residue from that whole thing of systems that help you assimilate people into the life of the church. We learned that.
Yep.
And God began to bless it and began to grow.
5 years later.
Yeah, 5 years later. Yeah. I went to a beach. I remember 5 years later, we had for Easter, I think we had 350 people. And I thought, man, there's 10 babies in the nursery. What are we going to do? We don't know what to do with all this growth. And so I went to the beach, and I took my Bible and a notebook, and I read the Lord's Prayer and prayed that your kingdom come, your will be done in Mount Pleasant right here on earth as it's done in heaven. And then I asked God to give me a picture. What does that look like? What would that look like? Because I want to reach unchurched people, and I want to reach more people. And I'm from small churches and, churched all my life. What does that look like? And so we began to really dream and develop what they'd call today strategic plans, but just how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? And it began to grow.
That's interesting. So really, you had to do 5 years of flailing around, trying hard to be somebody other than yourself, tempting to resign a series of times.
Yeah.
And you just think how many folks that is kind of the end of their story.
Yeah.
That they don't get to the other side of that 5-year window. I had a business guy tell me, it's interesting when I think about your story, I was talking about all our church planning efforts and things that aren't working and how miserable it is and churches that fail and how sad it is. And he said, well, what do you do with all these people that it doesn't work? What happens? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess they're in our churches, I hope. I mean, I'm not really sure. He's like, really? That's insane. He goes, I'm a business. I've started all these businesses. We assume people are going to fail 2 or 3 times in business. Wow. There's no entrepreneur that hits it ever. That just doesn't happen, Jay. Ever.
It's true.
The very best businesses you've ever seen, they ran maybe 10 things before they built their bit. You know why? Because they learned something. Every time they learned something, every time they learned something. And so, Jay, when I bump into somebody that's failed 8 businesses, but I still think that they've got passion and hope and they're a learner, I think to myself, man, I got to invest in this person. I'm most resident.
That's so good.
Oh, and it was good. I just remember, I can remember exactly where I was sitting with him because I was like, I think I've been thinking about this the wrong way. I should probably be on the lookout, because when I hear your story, somebody keeps taking a bet on you, even when you try to quit. And
that's true. And,
it's amazing.
Sometimes sometimes we need just to hang in there.
Yes.
Sometimes we need to go, you know what? That was a great season.
Yes.
And move on to the next season. Sometimes the new season is doing a similar thing, or sometimes, I've discovered that the heart is right.
Yeah.
The passion is right. The gifting is not optimal for what they were trying to do.
Yep.
And that's what I love about the church these days, is that there's just room for a lot of different kind of gifts.
That's right.
And that's how you build a strong church, is you look around and you go, who has God given us here?
That's right.
What are they really gifted at?
Yes.
One of my favorite scriptures is the idea that there's a wisdom in a multitude of counselors. And that's true about counseling, but it's also true about building a church or anything else. I don't have to know everything.
Yeah.
I just have to know people that know something about things. And if I don't have to do it,
right.
if I don't have to micromanage it,
right.
I can release it and it can grow.
That's right. That's good. Okay, so if people don't know Seacoast, they should know Seacoast, because it's an incredible church. Multi-site, lots of different church planting. And so the church, of course, continues to grow. You guys have built just an incredible ministry. When I was telling you before we got on, when I was having a minor personal crisis in the life of our church, we'd grown a bunch, but it just started to occur to me, we're not going to reach our city. It's not possible. Like if we planted like a ton of tons and tons of churches, we're still going to make like a really small dent. And I love the whole church. So I was doing stuff with other pastors, but I was just recognizing and also it's really hard to be the church where you live when you drive somewhere you don't. It started bothering me, and we couldn't get enough church plants going. And so I started thinking about multi-site. I'm going, I wonder who does multi-site and different kinds of network church planting thoughts and whatever. And so I did a little tour. I went to Willow. I came out to see you guys, sight unseen. I literally called the office, just said, I'm a pastor in Denver. And your brother, Jeff, spent the whole day driving me around.
Well, I was going to ask, were we nice to you? I hope we were.
Yeah, you were super nice to me. I think we went to 5 different locations on one Sunday. And we didn't see the whole service, of course. It's worship here, and then, hey, get in the car, let's go over here. And the diversity was so striking to me. So this is kind of like a blue-collar suburban vibe. And then this is kind of a older venue, felt a little more like an old Presbyterian church. And then we went into the kind of the main thing, and it felt, oh man, this feels a lot like a vineyard. There's a response time. The worship was a little different in the different places. And I was like, oh my goodness, this could happen. We could do this. This feels reachable. Because the other thing I was afraid of is just creating carbon copies. We're not that, honestly, I just felt like we're not that great at what we do. We share the gospel. I'm just being, because I would go to some multi-site things and I'm like, I get this. They're just they're
really good.
They're just so good at what they do. They just open them up. I'm like, we're not that good, but we're real and we see fruit and we really make disciples and we really share faith. But then to be able to see, no, you could do this differently. They don't have to be carbon copies, and you can try some different things as you can reach different kinds of groups and different kinds of places, or even have venues. It was genuinely inspiring to me. So I'm personally super grateful for you. You probably didn't even know that happened.
It happens regularly. It's kind of fun. And my mom used to tell me everybody's good for something, even if it's just to be a bad example. And maybe that's what we are.
Well, that was not my experience. And then, of course, then I hear you have this ARC thing. So there's this. And so I was like, I wonder what that is. So then I start looking into, oh man, so there's this interesting financial model. There's like these training pipelines. And so I was telling you again, before we got on, I just grabbed somebody else and literally just showed up. Like, I'm just going to go to their Find event, which is where they're looking for church planters and whatever. And again, I'm like super inspired. There's this like really clear talks on how church planting can work and why it's important and how fundraising can work. Because in the Vineyard, it was like, we just believe in you so much. Here's $3,000. I hope you do great.
We call that the y'all go ahead method of church planting. Y'all go ahead. We're going to be praying for you. Y'all go ahead.
Exactly. And so I'd never really even, I'd heard legends of people building big things or big starts like you describe. I mean, I knew that happened somewhere, somehow, but I didn't know, like, how would anybody do that? How does somebody do that? And so we've continued to learn so much from you. So talk about how you go from one church to thinking multi-church, multi-congregation, multi-site to ARC. How did all those things happen for you?
Well, we had no real model for multi-site. They were out there.
Right.
Brazil does multi-site and has been doing it for years. That's kind of what the Methodist Church was, is multi-site. But we didn't have any models that we were familiar with, and our church began to grow. It began to grow, and we added a service and added another. And I think we were up to 5 or 6 services, and I was about to die because I had this model of I've got to preach all the time. Now, what's interesting with Seacoast is there's a different speaker every week, for 6 weeks, and so that's a different model, but it's a sustainable model. But so I'm preaching multiple services every week and just hating my life. And the church is growing, and so we decided to build a bigger building. And so we went for real big. And we're, Charleston's interesting. South Carolina is definitely the Bible Belt. But Charleston it's a cosmopolitan city. It's a little different than the Bible Belt because it's a destination city and people have second homes here and all that kind of thing. And so the point I'm making is you build a bigger church. I mean, that place in the Bible Belt, that's great. They'll let us do it. And we went through a 1-year process with our city, and it came down to the last meeting, and they said, no, you cannot build a bigger building, and we're going to zone it where that's going to be nearly impossible for you to do it. Have a nice day. And I just was devastated. I tell people I went to my office and I did what I do when I get discouraged, is close the curtains down and turn the lights off and play some country music, because in country music, they always lose something, right? A dog, a truck, a girlfriend, And really, I had an epiphany in that moment that God is omniscient. I mean, I knew that, I taught that, but the epiphany was this: just because this is a surprise to God, or to me, doesn't mean it's a surprise to God. Yeah. And if he's not surprised, then he's at work on a solution before I even knew I had a problem. Okay. Yeah. And that has been something that's really guided me for a long time. And so we started to think about, well, what can we do? If this is the deck of cards we've been dealt, what can we do? And we can sue the city. And some people do that, and that's okay, but that's kind of who we're trying to reach. Right, exactly. What are we going to do? And so I began kind of nosing around and found a couple of models. Found Larry Osborne out in California that was doing multiple venues in one place. And Willow Creek was just starting their first off-site kind of an experiment. We went and looked at that. I took a guy with me who was the retired CEO at Fisher-Price Toys. And he had come to Charleston and said, put me to work. And so we went and looked at a couple of things. And he said, we can do this. We can figure this out. Let's see what we can do. And then at about the same time, and I don't know what stimulated that, I've always had a heart for church planters. We had planted a couple of churches out of Seacoast, 3. And we had one that was just a spectacular failure in Orange County. It just, we went through a lot of money and moral failure and all kind of things, and just didn't work. And so at about that same time, 2001, I think it was, 2000, something like that, a guy named Billy Hornsby, I met him, and he came to Charleston, and so we were doing and said, this is an incredible model. Took me golfing, and the model was, what he hadn't seen was a church with charismatic Pentecostal roots that was reaching unchurched people. And that's what we were doing. He said, what's the dream in your heart? And I said, well, if you really want to know, I want to plant churches. He said, how you doing? Or I said, I have a dream to plant 2,000 churches. It's just a crazy, crazy dream. I didn't tell a lot of people, but I want to plant 2,000 churches in my lifetime. And he said, so how you doing? And I said, well, we're 0 for 3, And he said this. He said, and this is an example of gifts working together. He said, you have an ability to communicate to unchurched people, make it seem normal, just the supernatural seem natural. And he said, you have a great model. I can create systems and some of that. And he said, why don't we work together and let's see if we can make this reproducible. And so we did. I hired him, came on board, and our first church plant was, we had 2 of them. First day was his son-in-law, Chris Hodges, in Birmingham, Church of the Highlands. And his buddy, Rick Bazette, at New Life in Arkansas. And both of those grew to be, there's 2 of the largest churches in America. But what they did is Billy was able to systematize some of what he saw. And it was amazing. And then I remember getting the idea for the funding model, and don't want to raise money all the time. How can we make that self-sustaining? And so that worked. And we got a lot of good people that came around the vision and dream and furthered it on. And hey, how many ever years later? What is it? 20 years later? We haven't planted 2,000, but we planted 1,100. So
wow,
that's just an incredible thing. And,
it is incredible. And if people haven't looked at what you do, how you do it, I really appreciate what we said earlier, because I've experienced this when I'm with, ARC folks, including yourself. There's a lot of ways to plant churches. So nobody's saying this is the only way to plant a church. We're not saying this is even the best way to plant a church. But for certain kinds of gifted people and certain kinds of teams that are coming from certain kinds of churches, which turns out is a lot, man, you've built a frame that is proving to be really fruitful. And
it's not a proprietary frame, meaning this. There are other groups that have taken the framework and reproduced it. And I learned this from Bob Buford, I think, at Leadership Network. He liked to say that a lot of their fruit grew on other people's trees. And we kind of have that same thing at ARC with our church planting. You can copy it and tweak it and do whatever you want to. Or, and I don't know if you know this, I may be relaying a secret, but we've planted vineyard churches.
No, I know. And, I know that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and we plant all kinds of churches. We don't have any ecclesiastical attachment.
Right.
We the body of Christ, and so we think we've got a good model on how to do it. One way to do it. And you put your sticker on that car, and that's fine. That's great.
No, that's it.
Well, so that's part of what we do.
That's my experience. No, I knew that you planted vineyard churches. I've been encouraged by that, by the way. And I mean, because there are certain kinds of leaders that fit how you guys are building systems, how you're thinking about large launches, how you do your sort of demographic mapping and your fundraising. It's high level stuff, and you don't work with just anybody. So, there's a pretty strong assessment vetting process. Like, okay, are you the kind of person that can plant the way we know how to plant, which is what I really appreciate about how you guys get done what you get done, because you have the guts to look at people and say, hey, maybe you're called to plant a church, but not the way we're doing it. Like, you don't kind of fit the way we do it. There's all these other people that do a great job. They can train you and equip you. So I just really appreciate that level of focus, that kind of clarity. And listening to your story, it makes sense.
I'm not the guy that tells them that. I'm the encourager. Okay, I tell them, you can do this. You can do this. Somebody else comes and says, probably not yet.
Yeah. Well, or not like this, or not like this.
Not like this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No,
and that's fine. That is good.
It's necessary, because the amount of people that get really hurt or messed up because it wasn't in the right season or in the right way is really high. And it's funny, listening to your story, it connects the dots for me. It takes you 5 years to figure out who you are and be okay with what you can and can't do, and what you will and won't do, and why. And it'd be great if we could help people do that without practicing on a church.
That's an idea. Yeah.
I mean,
we haven't figured that out yet.
No, we're all working on it. I mean, we're all trying. Yeah. But I mean, it'd be great, as much as we can. Maybe say it differently. As much as we can help them do less or learn more before they plant, then all the better.
Right.
And to get the kind of coaching and training and help that they need. Okay, so I want to wrap up, and I want to ask one more question. We could just real quick is. If you could look back and say, okay, here's all the things that we've learned, my experience of you is that we're very similar. I mean, like Vineyard folks, the way I've experienced Seacoast, I mean, it's just similar framing of how you're thinking about the lost and ministry of the Spirit, but being really authentic, and all the, your little, that we picked up from our church, for example, some of the things you do in your response time, that we call it kind of response time. There's more than one thing you can do here, and we can do this, we can do that. I just love, we've picked that up. We use that. I mean, I've used that since I visited, honestly, in our churches.
That's awesome.
That's
awesome.
Well, because, it just fits what we do. I mean, but it gives a few different kind of options around communion or this or that. So I feel like we're close. I mean, what would you want to say? Right now you're listening to, there's probably a whole bunch of Vineyard pastors, leaders, different folks in our Vineyard churches. What would you want to say to the Vineyard? Would you think about church planting? You think about leadership development?
Yeah. There's probably a lot of things, and I so respect the Vineyard movement. I just really do. I can't say that enough. At one point, I thought about joining the movement. I really did. That's how much I really respect what's going on there. And then I've had, I do some things in the UK twice a year with a group of pastors. And when you trace back in the UK, what's going on in the Spirit, you see Vineyard hands all over it. John Wimber all over it, whether it's Anglican, whether it's Free Church, the Vineyard movement, all that is what a great heritage. And so I would say, really celebrate that. Really celebrate that. But don't get your eye off of church planting. Movements that cease to church plant die. And we can see that all over. And you've got to have a passion for that. We desperately need more churches. Desperately, we need more churches in every city. You say, well, there's a lot of saturated places. Well, there's a lot of new kids being born, and new expressions of it. There's there and people have needs all over. And so I would say, as a movement, plant more churches. Do whatever you can to do that. I would say for leaders, I no longer in the lead pastor at Seacoast. I'm the founding pastor. We've turned it to the next generation, and it's doing really good. So I'm devoting my life, the rest of my life, to helping pastors live well and finish strong. And here's what I would say. Here's a phrase that has been driving me over the last 6 months, is that we need to be well so we can build well. Be well so we can build well. And I would encourage you to do whatever it takes to figure that out. How can I be well? Somebody just sent me something I don't know, a day or two ago, a text of a guy that, is setting up a coaching business, and which is everybody's doing that, but I thought, dude isn't well. How are you, what are you going to export? And even in our preaching, our teaching, our leading, we've really got to hone in on the soul and who we are and our relationship with God. My relationship with God now is better than it has ever been by far. And I wished I'd have known how sweet that could be and how important that was to prioritize while I was trying to build a church on my own at times. But that's, plant churches and pay attention to your soul.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think that sounds like what we've been trying to say. So that's encouraging. That's really, really, really good news. And I'm really, really grateful for what you've done, what you continue to do, how you model and you're leading. And I pray that we get to do some more fun stuff together. You just end there by saying, well, I'd have a lot to say. Well, I'll take you up on that. I'll come back around.
I tell you what, I would love to, got a little bromance going here. I'd love to connect with you more. And I love Denver.
Yeah.
And so when I'm in Denver, you need to buy my coffee.
I would buy your coffee and I'll take you golfing because I love to golf.
I'm a cheap date. I like to golf too. That'd be great.
Okay. Well, it was really good to talk to you. Really, really, really
good
do
to
appreciate
talk to you.
it. Very grateful for you.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.